In front of me are 10 equally sized boxes. Let's just pretend they're equally sized, please. It took me ages to put this together. I've also got a pie and a chopping board. This is a minced beef pie, for those of you who that matters to. Yeah, no particular reason. It's just about the right size for what we need to do here today, and hopefully it doesn't make too much of a mess. So these boxes break up the total UK population by how much wealth they have. Each box represents 10% of the population. So this box here will be the richest 10% of people in the UK, and this box here will be the poorest. The technical term for this sort of data presentation is deciles. The highest decile, which is the richest 10% of people, has around 50% of all of the wealth. The next 10% have around 20% of the wealth. The 8th decile have 12.4% of the wealth, 8.2% in the 7th decile. The 6th have about 5.2%. The 5th have around 3.1%. The 4th, 1.6%. The 3rd have 0.8%. The 2nd have around 0.4%. And the poorest 10% of people in the UK share between them about 0.02% of all of the wealth. That's about that much, I think. There's a bit of pie left over. This isn't a video about inequality. I mean, going through this, we will of course talk about inequality. It's inevitable, you can't avoid it. But that's not the purpose of this video. Today, we're going to look at what it means financially to be in this box here versus this box, the amount that it takes, and most importantly, the components of that wealth, and the distribution and how that has helped this section of the distribution get a lot richer in recent years. I'm hoping that this video will help some of you move up the pie chart a little bit. Okay, I'll start with a pie theme. This is a serious topic after all. There's a lot at stake here.
Would you like some pie?
The rich get richer.
And the poor don't get a thing.
It's actually a vegan steak pie. I didn't really want to get fingering a load of steak on the table. The typical household in the UK has £302,500 in total wealth. That's absolutely everything: house equity, savings, pensions, whatever. And this is a median average, so it's the middle figure. If we switch to the mean figure instead, well then the average raises to £576,000. That jump highlights the heavy impact that the wealthy have on the overall average, just dragging it up a lot. So let's break this down into deciles, shall we, so we can have a clearer picture. The richest 10% of households have around £2.4 million in wealth. But 5 individuals in the UK have a combined wealth of over £51 billion, which is more than 70% of the UK population combined. So yeah, even in the richest decile, there are layers to this socio-economic puff pastry pie of ours. If you want to explore these median figures and mean figures in more detail, the ONS put together this lovely interactive map that shows you the median and mean figures by area. I'll leave it below for you. But there are issues with this ONS data, because it relies on survey responses first of all, and it doesn't include business assets, which is kind of crazy. I found a great paper by Advani, Bangham and Leslie on this topic, and they estimate that about 800 billion of wealth held by the very wealthiest in the UK is missing. How much money and where that money is a question of both national and individual importance, because on the national scale it should be informing tax policy, but also for an individual it might help to inform your own investing attitudes. Because, if us mere mortals understand how the rich are allocating their funds, it might change the way we allocate ours. From 1895 to 1985, inequality in the UK fell, but then it flatlined. And then recently, inequality has been on the rise again. Drivers of this inequality are varied and complicated, I know that. And what I want to do today is be quite narrow in my focus. I want to look at how the components of wealth across these deciles is exacerbating this inequality problem. So yeah, don't worry, I'm not about to go on a political rant. I think that one's called a Jonathan Pie.
No, everything is shit.
On screen is a chart that looks at where each decile keeps their wealth. The chart starts at number 2 because basically people in the bottom 10% of the population have a negative net worth. They have no wealth. First of all, notice how the poorest sections of society hold the majority of their wealth in physical items. The paper observes that deciles 2 and 3 hold the majority of their household wealth in consumer durables. Consumer durables are just goods that last a long time, but they're not really assets. They're things like mobile phones, a car, a laptop. If you don't have much money, then the wealth you do have will be in the stuff you own. 60% of the second decile's household wealth is tied up in items that depreciate in value over time and will just ultimately need replacing. Another observation that we can see here is that for all deciles, one of the most important wealth generating tools is their pension. But interestingly, it declines in importance in the top 10% in terms of relative to their overall wealth. There could be a few reasons for this. With pensions, first of all, they tend to get more valuable as we get older. People just tend to get more valuable as they get older. So, in the lower decile number, 1 and 2, you might have a student with no wealth. All of that's just in an iPhone. Whereas in 8 and 9, you could have someone approaching retirement who has a big chunky pension. People move through the deciles as they get older in this way. And typically, the higher deciles on the pie chart have older people in them. But also, to be clear, you're unlikely to save your way into the top decile from a zero start. You need a lot of wealth to get there, and that might explain the lower pension allocation at that end. Caps on pensions such as the lifetime allowance, which might be scrapped, means that the richest decile have been incentivized to park their money elsewhere as they will hit those limits. They have so much money that they essentially cap out on the pension benefit and their money goes elsewhere. Another observation that sets the top 10% apart is the presence of high percentages of business and financial assets. 30% of the wealth for the richest 10% of families comes from financial or business assets. This contrasts with just 12% of the total wealth for the next richest decile. It should come as absolutely no surprise to anyone that the richest people in the UK have stakes in businesses, as they've either inherited them or built them themselves, and there's a limit to how rich you can get from being an employee. Financial assets though, these are interesting because they're not like pensions and property, they are liquid. You can get your hands on them. Think stocks and shares, think, cash in a bank account. It's stuff that's easy to get to. So the paper also explored where each of the deciles puts their financial assets, this pot of money that's easy to access. But before we get into that, let me tell you about today's video sponsor, Ground News. Finding credible sources can be challenging. I will admit that I've fallen foul of quoting or crediting a source that I later discover has a significant political agenda or a bias one way or another. One solution that I found to checking my sources prior to sharing them with you is Ground News. They're actually a pretty incredible app and website that offers a pretty unique service. They gather related articles from around the world in one place so you can compare coverage on any given story and see if those sources have a political bias. Let me show you how it works. So I was doing some research for a video on the idea that Jeremy Hunt may or may not cut taxes further prior to the election. And I can see that this story has 25 different media outlets reporting on it, and that the majority of them are centre rated, with about 30% of the coverage coming from the left and 10% from the right. Best of all, I can then scroll down here and compare headlines that see how outlets' political bias might influence the way that they frame the story. For example, this left-leaning headline suggests tax cuts would hurt inflation, while this right-leaning headline focuses on the idea that Hunt's refusal to cut taxes is creating a rebellion within the party. You can also go a step further than this if you want by checking out their feature called Blind Spot. It highlights stories that are disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. I think being able to see the political bias behind the headlines is going to be crucial in the coming election year. So check out the link in the description, ground.news/Damien, to get 30% off their Vantage subscription, which is about £4 a month for unlimited access to all the tools you need to compare and identify the facts. And thank you Ground for making the news more transparent. Poorer families hold the vast majority of their financial wealth in cash or current accounts, aka zero return assets. Richer households hold increasingly risky assets, which are also the type of financial assets that appreciate in value when stock and bond prices increase. Below the 7th decile, the largest portion of financial assets are held in places that generate zero return. The thing that is clear from this is the main wealth driver literally for everyone from 8 down is not financial assets, it's their home. But you don't need me to tell you that. How many people do you know who consider their home as their greatest ever investment? My property is my pension. It's almost a rite of passage in this country. You fly the nest, you buy a new nest and you fill it with shiny things, and that makes you an adult. That's called a magpie. An over-reliance on homes as the main vehicle for wealth is a key difference between the top 10% and the rest of us. In inflation-adjusted terms, many areas of the UK are still yet to recover to their 2008 property price peaks. It's counterintuitive, I know, when house prices have been rising so rapidly in recent years, but inflation has done serious damage to those valuations in real terms. There was some analysis by This Is Money, and they stated that the average UK buyer will have seen a real terms after inflation loss if they bought a home after December 2015. I'll link the article below for you so you can have a look and get the full context if you want. But the point here really is, because of a lack of exposure to assets outside of a home that carry risk, and with it the potential for reward, many have missed out on a massive wealth generating opportunity. The financial crisis did many things to this country, but most importantly, it destroyed a generation's faith in the financial services sector. Rightfully so, but the problem with this is, as a result, people turned away from investment products associated with this space. In an article produced by Investopedia titled "How the 2008 Crisis Changed the Way We Save and Invest," they asked 2,000 people how the impact of 2008 on their pensions and savings affected the way they save for retirement 10 years later. 27% of the respondents said they'd stop saving for retirement altogether, 14% continue to save for retirement but in cash instead, and 66% invest less than before. In the 10 years that followed the financial crisis, it was more about protest on Wall Street than it was participating in Wall Street. That one was called an Occupy.
Back in 2011, it seemed like Occupy Wall Street would change America.
But while that was going on, the markets just did one thing.
Wall Street is celebrating the longest bull market ever.
Since 2006-2008, total financial wealth in Great Britain has increased by more than 60% in real terms, that's after inflation, from 1.4 trillion to 2.3 trillion. Much of the gains in household wealth have been in rising financial asset prices. One of the saddest legacies of the financial crisis is the fact that it put millions of people off ever actively participating in investing. 7% of adults in the UK paid into a stocks and shares ISA in 2021, not even a full decile. I know we got a cost of living crisis, low wage growth, inflation, COVID, all of those things make it harder for anyone to save. But in a world where you can literally start investing with as little as £1, is it the case that 93% of UK adults can't participate meaningfully in the market outside of their pension? Or is there something else going on here? It's clear that business and financial wealth is the one thing that the top 10% have a lot more of than the rest of us. So why is it then my two immediate associations with those sorts of ventures is starting your own business is risky, 9 in 10 fail, and the stock market is risky, you could lose all your money and all of that? What sort of messaging is that? I'm not saying that everyone needs to start taking loads more risk in their lives. You know, the risk of starting a business when you have nothing to fall back on is massive. The wealthy can start a business, say, it fail and they be okay. I know it's a bigger leap for someone with nothing to risk that money. I know it's scary, I took that leap myself. But if businesses and financial assets are the thing that differentiate the top from everyone else, why are we not explained the risks more clearly? Why are we not taught about those vehicles in practical terms? That means people would at least weigh up subjectively if the risk is worth taking, instead of having what are quite oversimplified and frankly wrong assumptions about wealth generation through things like their property, their home, the stock market, and being self-employed. Let me give you some examples. The greatest financial crisis of a lifetime that decimated the country's finances and made every single individual in the UK poorer, and the best explanation we got of it was Margot Robbie in a bathtub.
They made billions and billions.
Or every time you hear about investing, you get a warning saying, this is super risky, you could lose everything, go and speak to a financial advisor. I want to be crystal clear that I'm not saying that these risk warnings shouldn't exist. I think we should have an adequate risk warning with any financial product anyone ever buys. All I'm saying is, in their current format, to me, it feels a bit more like people are just trying to cover their ass than they are genuinely help people. And I would like to see the regulator and the UK government be a bit more balanced in how they approach this, so they don't just paint everything as super risky. Because, you know, if you disagree with me, please let me know below. But in the current format, it feels like to me, before people discover what investing is, they feel like it's highly speculative and risky, and that it's more akin to gambling, smoking, and drinking, basically, in its risk profile. I got this comment the other day. I thought investing was just for rich white guys who read the Financial Times. I mean, that is a travesty, isn't it? One of the two things that separates the richest from the rest, one of the best performing asset classes on the planet ever, you can access it with a few clicks of a button and a couple of quid a month, and most people's perception of it is, that's not for people like me. It starts in school, where they'd rather teach you about the applications of 3.14159 than the benefits of consistent investing over a long time. There are so many reasons why the rich get richer, and we haven't touched on any of them today. I just want to acknowledge again, this isn't me saying that this is a complete argument. This isn't me saying, you know what, I figured out what's going on. But I looked at this data and where so many of us store our assets and what the vast majority of us in the UK rely on for building wealth. And it just reminded me of this time when I first went to Durham University. Durham has a reputation of being quite a prestigious university. It has a lot of well-off, privately educated students. I was the first person in my immediate family to go to university. When I grew up, it was just me and my mum. She never went to university, but she actively encouraged me to go. When I got there, it just became clear that there was a game that people were playing that I wasn't even aware of the rules. So things like people had internships lined up already. They'd done summer work experience before they got there. I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't even know you could do work experience. It's not their fault that they were better informed than I am, but the experiences of their parents meant that they understood the rules of the system better than I did, and then that gave them an advantage, and that knowledge just compounds through the generations. I think it's the same with money. People with good money habits pass on good habits to their children, and we then have a compounding effect through the generations that exacerbates the inequality problem here in the UK. I just think we owe it to the UK population to explain risk to them properly, not to scare them away, but to empower them with knowledge, that it isn't just your house that's a good investment, and investing really is something that everyone can be part of, that everyone can benefit from, whether you've got £1 a month or £1 billion. I don't know. Maybe that's just pie in the sky.